Welcome to HIV The Morning After. I'm Dan Hall. I'm a documentary producer and director. I've spent my entire adult life watching ignorance and prejudice play out around HIV. And frankly, I'm tired of it. And I'm sure many of you are too. This podcast is an attempt to do something about that. By doing what I do best, interviewing people and letting them tell their own stories. I can make these episodes, but I can't make people listen to them or find them on their algorithms. That bit's down to you. Please rate, review, and share HIV The Morning After. Right then, let's get started. When Hamish Noah was 11 years old, he was trapped on a hijacked plane. His mantra, even in that terrifying moment, was, "It's not that bad." Over the coming years, he'd need that mantra again and again. Hamish grew up in Southeast Asia and Africa before settling in the UK. He became a DJ, a charity worker, a man who knew how to be in a room and how to make people feel good. And how to make sure that no one looked too closely at what was happening in his own life. Hamish Noah, welcome to HIV The Morning After.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's good to be here.
Can we start by learning a little bit about your childhood? Where did you grow up?
Well, that's always a difficult question to answer. I was born in Cambridge in England. And then at 10 days old, went straight back to the Philippines, which was actually the first place I lived as a baby. And I grew up in Southeast Asia until I was 6, in 5 different countries during my first 6 years of life, which is absolutely crazy. That is because my dad was working in aviation and he kept getting moved around. So most of that was when I was a toddler, a baby and a toddler. And then mostly my first real memories are in Singapore, where I lived for 2 or 3 years. Then I moved to England, and then after a couple of years in England, my dad got a contract in Malawi in southern Africa, the work contract, and I remember him telling me and my brother we were moving there, and we were like, "What? We just got here to England, the outskirts of London in Surrey," and so then went to live in Malawi in southern Africa, and that was when I was 9-10 years old. And those years of my life when I was 9-10 were really shaped me.
With passengers from British Airways flight 2069 to Nairobi, please proceed to the departure gate where your flight is complete.
Now then, when you were still young, you experienced an incredibly traumatic event. What happened there?
Yeah, well, I was, as I was saying, my dad worked in aviation, so he was working for a large airline at the time, and he was working in Kenya, and this was before 9/11, so it was December 2000, and we were going out for New Year's, me, my dad, and my brother, and we happened to get the last 3 seats on this flight from London to Nairobi in Kenya, and we were really happy to get them. I think it's an 8 or 9 hour flight, 6 or 7 hours in, 6 hours in, I think. Everyone was sleeping. I was watching a film, I remember, at like 4 in the morning or something, 5 in the morning, and just being a kid, making the most of that. And the plane felt like it was taking off. Got like thrust into the back of my seat. This is a 747, Boeing 747, the biggest aircraft passenger plane in the world at the time. It just went completely silent. And then it just dropped. It was diving towards the ground. It nearly flipped on its back. It did what that plane is not designed to do, and we're lucky that the pilot, the co-pilot, pulled off what is known as the miracle manoeuvre. It's known as he pulled off something which no one has been able to do, I think, even on simulators since then. And he saved 400 people. And what had happened is a man with severe mental illness had written a suicide note and had gone into the cockpit and tried to crash the plane with 400 people on it.
The British Airways jumbo jet safely on the tarmac at Nairobi airport after a terrifying ordeal at 35,000 feet over Africa.
I don't think there's a single person on that aeroplane that did not believe that we were about to crash. I mean, every single person in that aeroplane was absolutely terrified. There were grown men screaming, people praying aloud.
Now, I can't even begin to imagine what that was like to experience that. And even reading about it in the research, this British Airways flight 2069 on 29th of December, it's chilling even to read about it. How did the legacy of that event stay with you over the coming months and years?
It's kind of hard to explain. I don't really remember details about the months afterwards. I do remember being asked if I wanted therapy. I remember my dad asking me that, and I didn't really understand it. It put me in a position where I thought I was about to die, and that did something to me. I don't know what, but after that I did definitely start to take more risks, and it's the complex trauma that followed as opposed to that single acute trauma that actually had the impact on my life.
You, as a teenager, really quickly started to get into music. I guess naturally, then it's no surprise you then went into being a DJ. Am I right then in thinking that you started collecting vinyl records from the age of 13?
That's right, yeah. I played piano when I was a kid, from probably when I was like 5. I think I got to grade 4 and then I just got bored. I was learning classical and I wish I'd carried on, but I didn't. But that sort of was the first step into playing music. And then I played guitar when I was probably 11, 12. And then again, I got bored of the guitar as well when I discovered turntablism and I discovered DJing. I've been starting to listen to electronic music and stuff like UK garage and jungle and drum and bass, which were big things in the UK at the turn of the millennium. And but it was only me and one of my mates in school that were listening to this. Everyone was listening to Slipknot and Nirvana and Korn and stuff. And that I was just me and my mate were listening to this electronic music, this dance music, club music, and hip hop, which one of my aunties, who's African American, introduced me to. DJing has been a way for me to channel what I love from a young age. The other thing was that I was in such a state for most of the week with the amount of drugs I was using that I was like, I can't go into a job or a career that's not got some sort of routine and stability. I will literally not be here in a few years. So I went about trying to get, like, in quotation marks, an office job or a day job, something that would give me some routine. And I just fell into working for a couple of fundraising agencies. So I used to work in a call centre and I worked knocking on doors, door to door. I'm sure you might have had someone knock on your door asking you to donate to charity. I used to be one of them. I fell into working in the charity sector. What I'd always wanted to do was just help people, even though it wasn't face to face. I was helping people through the work that I was doing, and And yeah, I just kept DJing on the side. And in a way, I sometimes find that is helping people too, just helping people let loose and move their bodies and forget about their lives for a few minutes.
Can you tell me, when did you first notice that the way you were living was more than just having a good time and it was starting to become problematic?
When I was 13. I knew that quite early on, like quite young. Yeah, I went to some very dark places when I was a teenager on multiple occasions, and yeah, I knew straight away that it wasn't for the right reasons. I mean, my mates were all starting to drink as well and starting to smoke weed. I was smoking weed from 13 and daily by 14. And I mean, it was probably daily at 13 as well. And it was just pretty ridiculous. And I was doing things like shoplifting to fund my habit. I was lying to my parents. I was doing it to escape, and a lot of the time I wasn't enjoying it. I wasn't enjoying being high. I wasn't enjoying getting paralytic drunk.
It's curious that we often talk about numbing strategies as bad things, and I think I used all sorts of things for numbing strategies so that I don't have to process stuff. I've used alcohol, I've used sex, I've used running as way, something to do so that I don't have to process something. And I do think sometimes numbing systems get a bit of a bad press, because I think often we do them because we're not ready to process whatever we need to process. And so therefore we just take another option, and that other option might not be perfect, but it is probably better than having to face the reality of whatever it might be when we're not ready to do that yet.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. Really, really good way of putting it, yeah. Because despite everything, I really wouldn't, I have no regrets. I have no regrets, and I think all of that years of numbing in my life has prepared me for this part of my life. Life is short as it is, and there's a lot of really difficult things that happen in it, and sometimes the pain pushes people to points where they can't go on anymore, or they will lash out in ways that are really dangerous for not just themselves but for other people. And so if those are the alternatives, that harming themselves and other people with their behavior, with their mental health, then if that's the alternative, then maybe being out of your head every week for a few years, a difficult period of your life is not quite as bad.
And then later on, as a youngster, you've spoken about chemsex as well.
Sex and drugs going together has always been there, from being a stoner young age to drugs like cocaine and ketamine. It didn't even matter. I was always on something. So it was sex usually happened when I was on something. The meth and the chems, the meth and gin stuff came in more recent years. And
there was an interview I did in the previous series about this and about this subject, and I was trying to get very philosophical and deep about it, and my guest just went, well, it also feels really good. It's also easy for us to sort of wrap these things up and try to give intellectual reasons, but things that, whether they're escaping mechanisms or not, things that make you feel good inherently, because they make you feel good even if it's just for a brief moment, can be very, very seductive.
Of course they can, yeah. I mean, I actually describe, I've been, don't get me wrong, I've been in some dark places with it, but for the most part, the way I would describe chemsex in my life is it's going on a holiday a lot of the time. It's going on a holiday from your life, disappearing for however many hours or days. I was doing it because it felt good. It felt better than being stressed and an absolute nervous wreck without doing any drugs. number one, and number two, it's I think a lot of the time, for me, I've actually had I've had this in relationships as well. For me, sometimes it has been built around connection and not taking me away from connection. And it depends on the drug, I think, and it depends on the situation and the person. But that makes it an even harder thing to change is if you're using chems and you're actually deeply connecting with someone.
Can you take us to New Year's Eve 2019? Just to remind people, at around this time, we're starting to hear reports of a virus in China. And so we are, 3 months away from lockdown. And it's New Year's Eve 2019 going into 2020.
I had a bender on New Year's, as usually happens. All sorts of drugs, but it was definitely like several days with meth, and I'd been getting unwell for a few months before, and in bits, kind of chest infection, and then it was an eye infection after this New Year's Eve. I'd been living in so much denial that it hadn't been on my radar to go and get tested. I'd been using protection in every scenario, in every risky scenario, and I was just convinced I didn't need one. Obviously, in the time before, and but because I'd been losing probably I'd been losing like a couple of nights of sleep a week on average during this period, 1 or 2 nights of sleep a week. It's ridiculous. I went to the clinic. It's a bit of a blur, but I remember being at home on the 6th. I went to the clinic on the 6th, I think, and I was at home. I actually can't remember the detail. This is the thing. I was on a comedown, and as usual, I'd entered the year in an absolute blur. So I don't remember the detail, but on the 8th of January, I got a phone call. And that was this turning point in my life. I remember being stood in my bedroom in complete disbelief, and it's like those things you like when you see that time stops in the movies, and just like your whole entire perspective just gets flipped, and I couldn't believe the words I was hearing. I had a partner at the time, and she was just unbelievable support and just stayed with me when most people wouldn't, and supported me through that time. And I frankly owe my life to her, and I carry a bit of that love she gave me in everything I do every day. I absolutely owe everything I'm doing today to my partner at the time. And the call I had with the Terrence Higgins Trust was really, really, or calls, I should say. I called the Terrence Higgins Trust a few times, and I'm in touch with the person I spoke to now, and on the helpline, and I work for Terrence Higgins Trust now, do some speaking for them, and it was a lifeline. There's no other way to describe it. It was a lifeline. I didn't know what I was going through. I was all over the place, all these questions, thinking my life was over, and to have someone who could kind of put an arm around me in that moment, even through a phone line, and just give me the facts, and help me understand what was happening. It was just amazing.
So then, Hamish, you you have this relatively new diagnosis, but you choose to only tell very, very few people, even though some people listening to this might think, well, it's 2019, it's 2019, 2020. This is the age of enlightenment. There's no need to be worried about sharing your status, but you chose not to.
The first thing I'll say is I experienced stigma, and I still to this day, stigma and discrimination from people very close to me. And that was really damaging, and it still hurts a lot. And it's not based on science or the latest stuff. It's just cultural conditioning from, unfortunately, some cultures are very homophobic and have set views around HIV, and they're very, very difficult to change. And there's a lot of other stuff wrapped up in that. And the other reason was I hadn't accepted myself as bisexual at the time of my diagnosis. I still hadn't accepted it. And again, that comes down to being made to feel I was wrong when I was young, and not being in spaces where I necessarily would feel accepted. And so I didn't know how to cope with those feelings. I didn't know how to process them. I didn't know how to live openly at that point with not just HIV, but just with everything, with my addiction, with my sexuality. I didn't know how to live openly.
It's curious hearing this because I'm, a generation older than you, and my perception of sexuality and sexual living amongst your generation is one of freedom and openness, and there are far fewer problems than we have. People in their 50s are constantly wandering around saying how much harder it was for them than it was for anyone who's younger than you. But it sounds like that's simply not the case, that you absolutely had your own journeys and challenges to go on.
I do to this day. I'm half of my background is from conservative African country. A lot of the people in your life are coming from a culture that is very homophobic and not accepting and not liberal of things like queerness and HIV. Then it's a real struggle.
But that must have been so very challenging for you to be happening at a time when you've also removed a lot of your coping mechanisms. Admittedly, you're learning better and healthier ones, but to some extent, they're still an embryo and will be for years.
The thing that's helped me the most is developing my own relationship with myself, and getting to a point where I know it's a them problem and not a me problem. And that's the thing that I found difficult for so much of my life, is I felt I didn't accept myself. I didn't accept myself fully, and I didn't, and I altered my way of living, how I thought of myself because of other people's opinions and other people's warped and twisted views. Just, you start talking about something that means a lot to you and you just get shut down. HIV activism means a lot to me, and it's like when someone doesn't even want to hear about it, it's really tough.
And I think people who haven't experienced those microaggressions or those little moments of constant silencing absolutely don't understand the cumulative effect of them. They'll just see the one event and think that someone's getting pointlessly wound up over something that's so petty. And what they don't see and don't realize is the culmination of lots of these many little things create something that's much, much bigger.
Well, there's two types of trauma that I, as far as I'm aware. There's acute trauma, which is, as we started talking about the plane I was on, that's an acute trauma. That's a single traumatic, major, life-altering event that people understand that concept very well. Someone being at war and being under attack, or a major injury, a car crash. These are acute traumas. And then the other side is complex trauma. And this is often It could be a whole series of acute traumas over the course of years or decades, and I'm talking about like major traumatic incidents happening again and again and again and again and again over years or decades. Feeling you can't change your situation, you can't get away from this person, like you need to have this person in your life, or you can't get away from these people. For example, school is a great example of that. You're just in school and you just have to go and be there with these people every day. And if you're bullied at school, or you're made to feel like you don't belong, or you're made to feel invisible, or you're silenced, and then you have to spend 5 more years with these people every day. That's complex trauma. That actually changes the fabric of your identity, of your being, and it shuts you up for years or decades, and that is extremely damaging. And the trauma lives in the body. It's stored in the body, and it comes and the brain makes sense of it. And so I was talking about race, we're going a bit off HIV and addiction here, because the race thing came first for me. I understood racism before I went through all these things in my life, because I saw it happening to my mum. I remember my mum being told to go back to Brixton, and I remember her being like racially abused when I was a kid, and I remember like running to get my cricket bat to defend it. I was like I did not understand, and I did not understand how people could do that, but they would just minimize it like it's not a big deal. And I saw then what my mum might have had to go through. She's a black African woman marrying a white British man and moving to a white British country, and when she did, and that builds up each little thing you go through, and it could be really little things, and it is stored in the body, and it's stored and it comes out. It manifests as stress. It manifests as anxiety, fear, responding, finding it more difficult to respond to certain situations, and that gets passed down through generations. And I'm most certainly taken some from my mum, from some of the stuff she went through probably when she was younger, and she would have taken stuff from her parents, and so on, being from a former British colony. And this is not spoken about enough, the complex trauma that's happened for generations and hundreds of years before. And I'm not talking just about race, I'm talking about in society, in people in general. It's passed down generation to generation, and it is actually dictates your biology, your physiology, the way your body responds in situations.
So I'm guessing, Hamish, at the time of your diagnosis in early 2020, that the world and language of HIV probably wasn't that familiar to you. So things like U equals U, meaning undetectable equals untransmittable, these are hugely important concepts, especially when it comes to the mental health of living with HIV and living in the outside world. When did you first become aware of these terms and how important they were as concepts?
I learned about it in those early days after my diagnosis, early weeks. I didn't know about it before, but it took a while for it all to sink in. It took me a while to believe that the treatment was that effective. I didn't know if I really actually believed what the doctors and the peer supporter were telling me about, oh yeah, you can live a long and healthy life, you can live the same life as anyone else if your immune system recovers and you stick to treatment.
So you were thinking that maybe they were just being nice.
Exactly. I think there was an element of that, and I'm saying this not as, I wouldn't necessarily have thought that. I wouldn't have thought that if it was someone else telling me this information. If someone's telling me, oh yeah, I'm U equals U, I'm on treatment, I can't pass it on. I think I'd absolutely trust someone telling me that if it was that, and I Googled it and I saw that information online. I'd be like, oh wow, cool, right? That's just normal life. But because I was going through drug and just life withdrawals of changing my physiology. My mind and body were going through a lot at that time. I was majorly going through anxiety, and that was I was starting on 3 pills a day, taking 2 grams of medication a day, and I was going through all of this simultaneously while not talking about what I was going through. So my mind was going to the worst possible scenario.
So there's huge amounts of changes in your life. You've experienced COVID, you're emerging out of addiction, you have this new HIV diagnosis, you're getting all sorts of data in from all sorts of places which you later realize are true, but you find yourself thinking, oh, is this really going to be as effective as this? Am I absolutely going to be untransmittable? And all these things. And also you're not telling a lot of people because you're still very much managing your own relationship with the news that you've got. But 4 years later, something changes and you decide to start talking. Why?
Yeah, it's a good question. I went through a lot in 2023 as well. I think 2020 and then 2023 were like key years for me, because 2020 was the start of all these big changes, and then 2023 at the end of 2022, basically I resigned from what I thought was my dream job, and I left without a plan, and I started this journey of moving into coaching as my main line of work. I started doing some training and learning a lot. I was reading books constantly about recovery and mental health and self-acceptance and vulnerability and authenticity and all these things. And so I was doing that throughout 2023. So I think by the time it got to the end of that year, I was in a much better place mentally, and I went through a lot that year. I went through a big breakup, and as I say, for the first year coming out of my previous career. But I also had some coaches that I worked with that year, life coach, recovery coach. I got some support around my chemsex struggles. So it was a really pivotal year for me. And as I reached the end of that year, all of that stuff I'd been learning and all the sort of this new phase I'd gone through kind of, I think, just paved the way for me to talk more about what I was going through. I'd learned about really the impact of not talking about things on me a lot more. I started to realize that although I was talking about some things, and I was talking to some friends, I realized I needed to open up. And it's not the same for everyone, but for me, I realized I needed to open up about things. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but it was one little thing after another. And then it was World AIDS Day, 2023, December 2023. There was a call out from this, I was working at a large mental health charity at the time, and there was a call out for anyone who living with HIV who would be willing to answer a few questions. And so I answered that call, and I answered a few questions, and it went to hundreds of staff. And that was the first time I'd spoken to more than one person about my diagnosis, about my status. I got really good feedback from it, and it gave me a sense of relief talking about it. It helped me make sense of things a bit more, and it made me realize the benefits of talking about it. And so that was December 2023. And then in 2024, on the 4th anniversary of my diagnosis, I shared my story on social media, and that was the start of this whole new chapter. And I kind of was like, if I'm going to be a recovery coach and I'm going to do this, I really kind of feel it's helpful for me to share why I'm doing this. And what triggered it all was my diagnosis, what initiated this entire phase of my life. But the thing that pushed me over the edge, I've never shared this publicly, Dan, but I'm gonna share it with you now. Is I have a condition called cluster headache, and it's one of the most painful conditions known to science. It comes on for me every couple of years for a few weeks, and it's completely debilitating. It's classified as a disability. I can't work for weeks when I've got it, and I had them in late 2023, early 2024, on the 4th anniversary of my diagnosis. And the treatment is very difficult to get appropriate treatment, even on the NHS. It's very expensive. And I'd come to realize in recent years that psychedelics actually can help to reduce the severity of cluster headaches and can actually stop them at times. They can reduce the severity, reduce the frequency. These are attacks of pain you get day and night for weeks on end. Well, 90% of people, it kind of happens that way. And I can't explain how debilitating they are. They are so extremely painful. It's indescribable pain. And you will do anything to stop it. I've tried to knock myself out, hitting my head on a wall. It's nicknamed suicide headache, to give you an example. That's the level of pain. It is one of the most painful conditions. So I was going through this at the start of 2024 to help me cope with the pain, to try and stop it. I got hold of some psychedelics, some LSD and some mushrooms, psilocybin, which I literally took for medicinal purposes to try and ease the pain. And actually, when I told the neurology department this, they were like, we know. In a way, it was like, we know the benefits. It wasn't a surprise. And it's no surprise it's being prescribed. These things are being prescribed and trialed in numerous countries around the world for their medicinal benefits. So at one of the days I took some LSD in early 2024. I took a dose of LSD and I had an epiphany, and I've never had this in my life so clearly. And I remember where I was in my living room. I was on my own. I was feeling totally at peace and total clarity, and I was like, of course I'm going to share my story. Of course I'm going to do that. And I wrote basically 90% of the posts that I then shared on social media a couple of days later. I wrote that. LSD, psychedelic, helped me to get in touch with myself and open up this new phase of my life. And I've not touched LSD since then. It's just gone past the two and a bit years since then. I haven't even touched it since then. But in a way, I'm like, could it ever be that beautiful again? I mean, because I was using it to help me with pain for something else, and yet it opened the doors to this new part of my life. And that's actually what is being studied now in the field of mental health and trauma, and the profound impact that psychedelics can have on someone's sense of self-acceptance, sense of connection with themselves and the world. And it's no wonder it's being psychedelics like LSD, psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, MDMA, are all being studied, trialed, and in some cases prescribed now for treatment for anxiety, depression, PTSD, addiction, and even eating disorders. It's made me a better person. It's made me a more balanced and loving person, and it's helped stabilize me. It's done the complete opposite of what many other drugs were doing. I mean, there's things. I say this to everyone. There's certain contexts where drugs harm you, and there's certain drugs that harm you, and there's certain drugs that can help you in certain contexts. And for someone who does experience things like anxiety, depression, PTSD, addiction, there are instances where drugs can help you, and that is not even it's not even debatable. That is why someone who's lived with PTSD symptoms for most of my life. That is why, for example, MDMA is being prescribed in assisted therapy in Australia.
When you shared your status publicly, you spoke earlier about how there were members of your life who were close to you who were not so supportive. Were you concerned how such a public sharing might affect them, or how they might feel about you being so open about something which they maybe felt you shouldn't be open about?
Yeah, I was very aware of how opening up about my own story could affect other people. For example, I've spoken about the African side of my family. Like, culturally, this is what I did in opening up publicly about my status is much more difficult to do for someone in living in the culture where my mum grew up. And so for example, I was very aware of how it might impact her. If I continued living my life glossing over it or keeping it bottled up and keeping it in silence, I mean, it would prevent me from doing all the great stuff that I feel I'm able to do today. It would have prevented me from doing that. It would have held me back. And so I just see it as a net benefit. There's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be challenges. There's like, you weigh things up, and actually I had members of family, extended family, friends, people, a lot of people, like, and it's been overwhelmingly supportive messages and support, with a few judgy people in there, and there might be very big judgments, and there might be people who are horrible, angry, violent people in the world. For the most part, my experience is it's not brought on as many problems, and we're never going to address the all the negative things in the world by like, again, going back to what I said earlier, by adjusting our behavior and ourselves to fit them. Like, I am like, to be honest, when I shared it, I was like, I'm prepared for whatever pushback I get from this. I'm prepared for whatever comes from it. I'm just going to do it.
Your existence isn't for the convenience of other people or their comfort. Exactly. And that's how am I going to, how is it helpful to stay silent and not talk about it? I mean, ultimately it's just the silencing and the changing how you talk about it is really just for the comfort of other people, and that's not going to help anyone. Now, you've been on a massive journey of change since 2019. And 2019 wasn't that long ago. And it feels like, hearing your story, that almost every few months you had to reset and become something else, or add another identity, and that there's this huge amount of work that you've been doing. Where are you now?
Oh, that is it's absolutely how I feel. I feel I've been through. When I look back, as I said, I'm 37 in a couple of months. Look back to when I turned 30, I just cannot believe what I've been through in these 6-7 years. And the place I'm in now is I feel I've now settled into my new career as a coach, my new full-time career as a coach. I've settled into HIV activism, advocacy, and I feel like they are established parts of my identity. As you say, taking on new identities and shifting identities is a huge thing, and for a long time it just didn't quite feel real, because I spent so long working my previous job in the charity sector, so long being a DJ. I'm still the part of me that the musician part of me is still there and will rejoin the party at some point. But the having to put that on pause has been a real challenge for me. Music is my creative outlet, and I've found that in other ways. I express myself through the content I share online, express myself through writing and in other spaces, in other ways, in other ways in my life. But it's been where am I now is I'm finding new ways to tap into that creativity that I found through music, and I'm also finding ways to develop my work in coaching, recovery coaching, and HIV advocacy now that I feel a bit more settled. I think I've just spent the last couple of years like, whoa, this is a lot.
In your research notes, you've spoken about how you count yourself to be very lucky.
Living in Malawi growing up in Southern Africa really changed my life. I was 9-10 years old, and it was the first time in my life where I experienced a profound sense of gratitude, and also just for just being born into the life I've been born into, i.e. having everything I would need materially, having the ability to travel, having being living in a society where we've got free healthcare, we've got free education, we've got pretty much everything functioning that we would need, and seeing destitute poverty, and at the time it was one of the poorest countries in the world, and I was seeing that every day, and having to navigate those feelings of guilt, of like, why is the world like this? Why are there children on the street with no limbs and no food, and we're here going to the supermarket? And I remember just being in tears with my dad, saying, I don't want to eat dinner. Can you give it to them? At 9 years old, I was in absolute bits at the supermarket in Blantyre in Malawi, not understanding why I'm living a comfortable life, and there's literally an entire street full of children and people outside who are struggling to eat, who have major untreated health issues. And Malawi is one of the highest HIV burdens in the world as well at the time. I mean, a lot of these children would have been living with HIV with no treatment and no prospect of treatment. And that experience shaped me. I then went when my dad was working in Kenya, and I said about the hijacked plane I was on, and he was working in Kenya, and I during that period, the airline he was working for at the time, they were funding an HIV and AIDS project in one of the largest slums in Africa. It's the second largest, I think, and informal settlements. And I mean, we went to a community centre there where they were funding work. My dad said, "Look, I want to take you boys along." People's homes are made out of metal sheets, and there's no plumbing, there's no electricity. It's open, it's exposed to the environment. I mean, it's very, very crowded. It's very, very difficult living conditions. I don't think, for anyone who's been somewhere where there are people living in such conditions, you'll understand the impact it can have on you. I was driving for 20 minutes through this place and got to the community centre, and it was just so... I was in tears again. I think I must have been 11 at that time, and I was like in floods of tears and surrounded by meeting all these children who were living with HIV. And I did not know at the time how much that would be a part of my life. I had no idea. And I was just there meeting all these children who, again, were living with a life-threatening illness, and a sense of gratitude, and I'm just lucky to live the life I live and be born into. I could have been any one of those children, and we could be born into any life. We're just lucky to be born into the life we live if we've got all these basic necessities. I just feel lucky every day to live the life I live, and I feel a sense of duty to help other people to access the freedoms and stabilities that I'm so lucky to have.
So then, Hamish, we're coming towards the end of the show now, and this is the final portion. And this is the section of the show where I ask you to share with us someone who you'd like myself and the audience to be in remembrance with you about. Who is that person you'd like us to remember?
That person is Hidea Broadbent. I don't know anyone personally who has died of AIDS-related illnesses, complications. I don't know anyone personally because of when I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed in 2020, and thank goodness at a time when the treatment is so advanced that we can live normal, healthy lives with HIV. But I will never forget when I first saw this video of this young girl. I can't remember how old she is in the video, but she's, I want to say like 6 or 7, maybe. She's really young. On the Oprah Winfrey show in the 90s, this young girl with AIDS, who was, I think she was born with HIV and had survived AIDS, and she was there on the Oprah Winfrey show, this enormous, I think the biggest TV show probably in the world at the time, and was there sharing about HIV in such an eloquent, and it's making me emotional thinking about it now, actually. Wow, yeah. I think of all the people who message me every day. I think of how I felt when I was diagnosed. I think of the 40 million people who have died because of this virus. I think of the 40 million people living with this virus, and this one young girl who has survived what has taken, as I say, 40 million lives, and it's just speaking so powerfully, and it just completely took my heart. And and she passed away, I think it was last year or the year before, I just think what an incredible being, and the number of lives and perspectives that she will have changed through doing that, and that's who I wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Hamish Noah, if you could write a postcard to the world, what would it say?
Oh, that's a really difficult question. Do the things that really matter to you. Open your heart and try to be the best person you can be.
Hamish Noah, thank you very much for guesting on HIV The Morning After. It's been fantastic talking with you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Dan.
If you were moved or informed by what you heard today, please help spread the word. Subscribe to HIV The Morning After and leave a rating and a review. It makes a huge difference in helping others to find it. Your support helps to amplify these experiences. If you'd like to get in touch, you can email me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. And remember, if you encounter HIV stigma in a bar, call it out. If you encounter it at work, call it out. If you encounter it online, call it out. Because if you don't, you're part of the problem. The theme tune is by Pauline Nidu at unstoppablemonsters.com. And many thanks to Murray Lang for his continued support. And thank you for listening. Join me next time for another important conversation on HIV the morning after. I've been Dan Hall.